In this video we'll describe how to assemble it. So first thing you want to do is open up your bag and let's verify the contents. So you should have some hookup wires in here. However, not all kits had hookup wires. So if your kit is missing these, come by the Hardware Hacking Community booth to get some. You'll need approximately 8 of these. We'll set these to the side for now. Included in here is 2 sets of pin headers. We have the headers and the sockets. We have 2 LEDs, a green LED and a red LED. We have 3 different capacitors, 1000 UF, a 10 UF, and a 1 UF capacitor. This little bitty blue guy here. We have one 5-for-5 timer and a anti-static foam. There is one push button here, and there are 4 sets of 2 resistors. And these consist of 100 ohms, 1 kilo ohms, 10 kilo ohms, and 100 kilo ohms. We'll talk about figuring out which one of those is which here shortly. And you have a set of 4 mini badges. Now all these are on a single panel. I recommend do not break these apart just yet. Once we've assembled this, then we will break these apart. It'll make life just a little bit easier. So the first thing that we want to do is that we want to start breaking up our socket strip so that we can populate this board. This will be the easiest first step. So what we have here from the instructions will illustrate this a little bit better. The components mount up in the center here, and then these little symbols out here to the side. If I can focus on these, let's see if I can get this to focus. There we go. The little square symbols that you see here, find something I can point at here. These little square symbols here, those are where the sockets are going to go. On this one, these are 2-pin sockets. So there's a ground, VCC, and then 2-pin sockets. And on the rest of them, they are single socket sockets. So, next question you're asking yourself is, how do I get single sockets out of a strip that looks like this? Your best bet to make this work well is to use a set of wire cutters. Like these flush cuts work pretty good. You can snap these with your fingers, it's just slightly more difficult to do so. Like for instance, there's a set of 2 that I just snapped off. So what we'll do here is I'll use my flush cutters to nip these off, and if you need to borrow a set, there will be some sets available at the Hardware Hacking booth that you can borrow. So we're going to need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the 2-pin. And now we need the single pin for everything else, and we have 22 left. Okay, now we have our 22. We have a few left over here that are just extras. And on your pins here, it's not a big deal if the plastic comes off of the sockets. It won't hurt anything at all. So now, just while it's sitting on the table here, install your pin sockets. Okay, now that all your pins are installed, carefully pick up your board. If any fall out, like this little guy here, just put him back in. So now all your pins are installed. What we're going to do here is I have a piece of cardboard. We'll place the piece of cardboard over the top, push down on it so that you don't lose any pins, and then flip the whole thing over. It'll hold your pins in place. So now it's sitting upright and we're ready to solder. Okay, now that we've soldered them, we'll flip it back over. And you may have a few that, if I could focus in here again, you may have a few that are kind of at a weird angle or something, but that doesn't really matter. It won't hurt anything. So, now we're done with our cardboard. We can go ahead and start assembling the rest of the things. What I recommend is start with the lowest items first. So maybe let's put the switch in next. So you can place the switch in there, and the pins don't quite come all the way through the board, but just kind of hold it with your finger and flip it over so that it's held up on the table. And then we can solder it up. That looks good. We can put our chip in. Now, on the chip, watch carefully here that on this chip there is a dot. You see that dot? If I can get this into the right spot on the camera. That little shiny spot right there, that represents pin 1 on the chip. So when you're installing it on the board, note that pin 1 is noted. There's a little cutout there at the top. The other trick you'll notice is that this is going to be wider than the holes. I'm going to flip this over so that you can see a little bit better. But notice that it's a little too wide. So what you're going to want to do is take this chip, just place it on the table, just kind of carefully rock it over just a little bit onto the pins. Just a tiny bit here. You don't have to do it much. And kind of square up the pins so that it'll fit. So once we have it, then we'll go ahead and install it in the board here. Mine's still a little wide. I'm just kind of working it in. There we go. Have it pushed in. Now it should hold itself in place pretty well. What I suggest here is solder up pin number 1, then flip it back over, and notice that you probably can't see here, but my chip is sticking out a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my finger here away from the pin I just soldered. I'm going to apply a little bit of pressure while reheating that pin until you feel the chip move. And then the chip will move into its final position and be flat on the board. So now we can flip it over and finish soldering. Alright, now let's move on to the LEDs. On the LEDs, if you look really closely on the LED here, if I could focus in on it here again, there will be one side that has a shorter leg than the other side. The other thing that you can tell about it is that there is a flat spot. If you look at the bottom of the LED, see how it is round, except there is a flat spot that's the same as the shorter leg. Notice on the board that there is a flat spot noted. So when you install your LED, make sure that it goes the same direction so that the flat spot lines up with that flat spot. And it doesn't really matter which color LED you put where. I'm going to put red for low and green for high. Now you notice they're loose right now. They can rattle around a little bit. So what we can do is put your finger on them to hold them in place, flip the board over, and then take the pins here and just bend them out a little bit so that they look like that. So what that'll do is that'll hold it in place. So now when we flip it over, it'll hold itself in place so that we can solder these guys up. And I suggest the same technique as before. solder one leg, then flip the board over, and if it isn't sitting quite flat, just put a little bit of pressure on it and touch the soldering iron to the leg so that it straightens out, so you get nice straight components. It's not critical if they're straight or not, but I'm sure you would like to have them straight if possible. So let's finish soldering these. After we finish soldering these, next thing we need to do is nip off the extra. What I recommend is place your finger on top so that when you cut these, they don't go shooting across the room. And those extra wires, or extra pins, we do not need. Okay, I'm going to move on to the capacitors. So for the capacitors, notice that one side of these capacitors, of these two big electrolytic capacitors, have a stripe that's marked negative. The other side does not have a stripe. On the board, there is a side here that has a stripe. If you look really close, there's a tiny positive symbol there. So when you install this in the board, you want to install it such that the stripe is on the same side as the stripe. So the easiest thing to do on these capacitors is the same as before. Insert them, bend the legs a little bit so that they stay in place. You can, on the one that's in the package here, you can just nip the legs off if you want to, if you don't want to have to try to peel it out of that paper. We'll do the same thing. Install it, bend the legs over. And then finally, we have this little guy here. Now, this little guy does not have a polarity. It's an unpolarized capacitor. So it doesn't matter which side goes where. So all you have to do is install this guy in, which is a little bit of a challenge. Some needle nose pliers might help out here. I'm going to attempt to do this without them. Maybe you wanted to have done this before you installed the LEDs. There we go. And same sort of thing, I'm going to flip it over and use my fingernails here to bend the pins out. So now our pins are bent out, and we can solder and cut the excess leads off. Okay, all that's left is the resistors. Now there's 4 different values of resistors here. We'll start with the resistors for the LEDs, and those are 100 ohm resistors. So in order to tell which resistor is which, you could use a chart like this, a resistor color code chart. So what we're looking for a 100 ohm resistor, for instance here, the 100 ohm resistor is a brown, black, brown. So that means, looking at the stripes on the resistors, we want to find a set of them that has brown, black, brown. We'll zoom in here. You might be able to see the colors on here, but this is brown, black, brown. Another way that you can check the resistance on these is to use an ohm meter. I can put my ohm meter in the right mode here. So we put ohm meter across here, and this guy is measuring out 99.5, which is pretty darn close to what we want. So again, you can pull the ends off here, or you can clip them or whatnot. We're going to use a technique where these resistors are going to stand up. So what you're going to do is hold the resistor. Let me zoom in here so you can see. Hold the resistor, bend it over just one leg worth so that it looks like this. Then we're going to take that resistor And it doesn't particularly matter which way you install these. Do this over resistor while I'm at it. So I'm bending the leg over. Then the two holes here below the LEDs, you see that I've stood these two resistors up through the holes like so. So now I'm going to put my finger on it again and bend the leads over so that they'll stay in place. Just like that. And now we will solder it. Okay, on to the next part. So next we have three resistor values, 1K, 10K, 100K. The way this works is that both of these resistors here and here are 100K. So here's 100K, or 1K, 1K. Next row is 10K, 10K. And the last row is 100K, 100K. So we need to figure out which one of our resistors are which. So the first resistor we have here, we want a 1K, which is a brown, black, red. So we have a brown, black, red set here. Okay. The next set is the 10K. And from our cheat sheet here, 10K is brown, black, yellow. Here's our brown, black, yellow. There we are. And by the process of elimination, and also because brown, black, orange is 100K, that is our final set. So we bend these and install them. Okay, so now our mini badges are almost complete. We have all our components installed. All the leads are clipped off. So the next thing we can do is we can separate them. So to separate them, just grab them and they just kind of pull apart. You may have to rock them in one direction and the other just a little bit, but they'll just snap apart into individual mini badges. The last piece is to put the headers on them. And we need 2-pin headers. Each one of these gets 4. So we got 4, 8, 12, 16. So let's chop out 16. You'll have some left over. Now the easiest way that I find to do this is get yourself your badge or a socket. This is an older socket set here. If you're using your badge, make sure you power down your badge first. But what we're going to do is we're going to use the sockets to align the pins. So to start off here, insert a 2 set of pins into each of the corners. So it looks like that. They're in each of the corners. And then select one of your mini badges here, doesn't matter which, and install it over the pins so that the mini badge is sitting flat on the pins. Now that'll hold the pins perfectly in place so that you can come along with your soldering iron and solder them up. there we are. Mini badges are complete. So now that you have this done, you're ready to grab the circuit workbook and start exploring analog circuits.